So now that I've explained a little bit of the magic system, the politics, and just the world in Legacy, I really want to spend the majority of these videos really just going into the story itself. So chapter 1, I remember when I made the first video, I was going into the story and then I got off track with the magic system. So again, I'm just going to refresh so that every newcomer knows what's going on. So the story begins, of course, in the castle of Primordia called Austere. That's an important name for the castle. In the courtyard, let's say, I'm going to try to draw it up a little bit, actually. So let's say you got this courtyard over here, and in the middle of the courtyard is like this arch system. It kind of looks like what you'd see at, like, let's say like a wedding party or something. So you're surrounded by these stone corridors, right? And in this, it's surrounded by foliage in this courtyard. It's pretty much a royal garden where you can just be alone. But of course, since the main character, his name is Exion, he is only a young boy of about 8 years old, and he's fascinated with magic. This courtyard, instead of being a place of meditation, becomes his little training area where he gets to practice his magic. So, as you can imagine, you got, grass over here. And though, again, this isn't the prettiest thing, I do want to give a visual picture of exactly what's going on right now. So you got this courtyard right here. You got like those pots, with some kind of like plant in it or whatever. But then you got this archway, and in this archway is like a target. So let's say, there's this target right here with a bullseye. That's not quite the center. Oh geez, gotta make that thinner. There we go. So you got this target with the bullseye, and then you have a young man, which is the main character, right here. I'll give him a little bit more detail in a minute. And then you have an older gentleman right here, who is his mentor. So the story begins with Exion and this mentor practicing. Of course, the mentor himself isn't practicing because he already knows enough about magic. So the mentor wears a gray mage robe. I really don't know how else to call it except for mage robe. And he has his magic tool over here. So as I said in earlier videos, in my story, mages need a tool in order to use magic. They can't just use it willy-nilly. It's like the wands in Harry Potter. So you have him with his own that shares a kind of darker tone to it. It's mainly black. And then, of course, he has his fire gem right there. So pretty much this gauntlet right here, it's made out of metal, and on the top right there is a place where you can put a gem, and that gem has power attached to it. Exion, on the other hand, he wears black, and his gauntlet is a normal steel color, as most gauntlets are. The mentor, his name is Sophus, and that's important to know as a character. And so there we go. You got two different types of gauntlets. Again, Sophus's is a dark metal, while Exion's is a light metal. There's a lot of theme going on here, but they're practicing, right? So Exion's practicing his magic. It's focusing, through his body into the conduit, kind of like a reaction in science, and then he's able to fire bolts of fire out of his hand and hit the target. And so their objective right here in their little training session is they're trying to make a flame large enough that as it hits the target, it stays aflame. And so they're doing this, practicing, and Sophus is giving him some input, right? So I'm just going to make an arrow right here to show a scene change. So as that's happening, Exion's about to ready another time. So here is his arm. This is definitely not the best. So let's say his arm is right here, like that, and he's lifting it up, but then he's using his other arm to balance it, so he's really trying to hold it up, right? So again, we want to show that it's metallic, the gauntlet. So you have the gauntlet right here. It also reaches into the hand itself, and then you have the place where the gem is sitting. And then now this is a more close-up look, so you can start seeing other things, like how in the gauntlet itself there's this line that goes down made out of like a resin called the vein, which I described in an earlier video, which allows the magic to go into it. So Exion does this, he readies his arm, and he gets scolded by the master. So again, the master's name is Sophis, while the boy, his name is Exion. So he's about to use magic as his hand is resting on the gauntlet, which is an important detail. And this is where Sophis scolds him. He then tells Exion that, of course, if you do that, your hand is going to burn because the magic doesn't have that much control. And of course, he then says, he pretty much says, if you were to be burnt, the king would have my head. Showing that he has more concern for his own personal well-being than the kid's own safety itself. And so, Exion gets scolded. He, that's a crappy arrow. There you go. He gets scolded. He understands, so he tries again. And then from behind, as Sophis says, the king will have my head, that's when they hear from behind a very charismatic voice say, why would you think that? All confident, charismatic again. And this is where you see the king. His name is Praxis, or Mercer Praxis. So, trying my best to do an outline because I think all the detail would be a little bit too much. And so, yeah, I'm not going to put too much effort into actually drawing his character out. So let's say you got a guy who is obviously regal, you got the, what's interesting is he's a king, but he's like a warrior king. So you got this fancy, shiny, like golden chest piece, but you also know that it's not just pure gold. It's merely like gold emblazoned, if that's a word. And I'm trying to draw out of memory what I remember his whole outfit's supposed to be. So he's got the chest piece, and then he has what's called a crest on him. And then, again, he has a gauntlet. And so this is when it becomes apparent that mages are much more common than what other stories profess. But this time, Mercer has a sword as well. And this sword is important. So you see Mercer the king, standing there very relaxed. You see that he's not a very serious dude. Kind of asking him like, oh, why would you be afraid? Kind of like pretty much saying like you really don't have anything to worry about. Leaning against a pillar, something like that. But in his hands, he has an apple, which is significant. So he has this apple. He asks him, why are you so concerned? Kind of like joking, messing around with him, saying you're a little bit too uptight, Sophis, kind of banter like that. And that's not the best drawing I've ever done, but that doesn't matter. And so Exion, which is the son of the king, is 8 years old. He walks up to him, like a typical 8-year-old would when they see their dad. He says, Daddy, tries to run into his arms, and he hugs him, and then he hands Exion the apple. Wow, I do not know how to draw right now. Okay, so if you got the chest right here, shoulder, yeah, okay. So then you have Mercer giving his son the apple. And again, apple is a kind of sign of innocence, obviously. So he gives the son the apple. The son eats it, of course. He ruffles up his son's hair. Very typical setup to show that the father is a loving father and that he's very much into trying to maintain a good relationship with his son. And then, of course, these establishing moments are supposed to show the relationship between the two. So that's when Mercer pretty much dismisses Sophis, saying, okay, you guys have done enough training for the day. But then, unfortunately, Mercer is interrupted by a guard telling him pretty much of like, oh, there's something that needs to be done, right? And that something that needs to be done is important later in the story. But pretty much at this point, when this soldier's telling him that, that's when Mercer's a little bit like, pretty much downtrodden. He's like, "Are you serious? I just got to talk to my son, and you're doing this to me." So he's pretty much like, "You gotta be kidding me." But again, he is the king. He has a responsibility to his people, so he has to head out and go fix whatever the problem is. And wow, this is definitely odd proportions, but anyway, so he has to head out. But now we can go this way. But that's when he pretty much tells Exion, well, today's a special day. It's called Exchange Day. In the narrative, Exchange Day isn't explained, what its origin is. But pretty much Exion decides then, that he should go visit his mother's grave. And that's when it's established that the mother is, in fact, dead. She doesn't show up for a reason because she's not there. And he brings flowers. So let's say, we use some pretty colors. And we say that that is a bouquet of flowers. And that is definitely not the prettiest thing I've ever done. But you get the gist. So Exion goes to his mother's grave, drops her off flowers, and then, out of nowhere, he sees a really big, four-winged lizard creature walk up to him, right? And when I say really big, it's pretty much the size of a small dog at this point. And so he sees it, he plays with it, right? And then that's when, also, it's established that this grave is not within the castle itself. The grave for his mother is actually public, which is really interesting because she is a dead queen, right? So that's why this random lizard was able to show up. Exion looks at it, and then he comes face to face with the owner. And the owner is an orphan boy, roughly around his same age. So if you imagine Exion, wearing royal garb, magical clothing, you got pretty much the exact opposite of him. You got a very humble-looking kid. You got a kid who's like, tattered up, obviously a street orphan, stuff. And it looks like this kid's about to mug him, right? And so that's when you got this other guard, which is going to be important, jutting in. That is a horrible depiction of a helmet. So let's try to depict a helmet right here. And so here we go. You got this soldier right here pretty much butting in, telling the kid to back off and all that. But Exion rather says, like, no, it's cool, right? And they just keep talking. And then this is when he learns about the kid's name. The kid's name is Drake. For those of you that know, Drake also means, dragon, dragon-type creature. And so he doesn't really know his name. He's called Drake because he has a dragon, And yes, in this story, dragon does not mean fire breathing. So no fire. They're rather like domesticated creatures. They're horses with wings. Like, used the same way horses are domesticated, but they have wings. And so this is how you establish the friendship between the two main characters of the story. Exion, the prince, and you got Drake, the orphan, right? And that will be the conclusion of chapter 1. You got and of course, at this size, the dragon is small enough to fit on his shoulder. And so that is the conclusion of chapter 1.